and welcome to Veg Food Fest, brought to you by the Toronto Vegetarian Association, the TVA. Thank you for selecting on-demand programming over this amazing weekend. I am Denise Mehta, I'm the Executive Director of the TVA, and I am surrounded by royalty in the vegan filmmaking world, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of the introduction, at least, today. And I'm excited to introduce you as well to Jessica Scott-Reid, who will be moderating this panel on documentary filmmaking. And so Jessica is a well-known Canadian journalist covering animal rights and vegan issues for major media across North America. She's a regular contributor to Central Media, Tenderling Magazine, and most major newspapers across Canada. She's also the co-host of Canada's Animal Law podcast, For an Order, along with Camille Lapchuk and Peter Sankoff. So if you have tuned in, please consider joining the TVA and supporting us as we continue with our next 75 years of programming. If you're a member, you're able to get this amazing discount card that allows you to get about 5 to 20% of discounts at select restaurants and businesses throughout the GTA. And you also get an amazing newsletter called Lifelines every quarter. And most importantly, you'll be supporting this great cause and being a part of an amazing community. So please click on the link below for the amazing discounted membership that we're offering over the September month, where you can just sign on for $10 or renew for $25. And we're thanking our donor, Mahin Thakur, for this opportunity. So please sit back, enjoy this amazing weekend, and listen to amazing filmmakers as they take us through their journeys and all the exciting information that they're going to share with us this evening. So thank you, everyone, and have a good one.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for that. All right, we're going to jump right into this amazing panel, vegan filmmakers, impact in documentary filmmaking. I'm going to jump into the introductions. If everyone just wants to give a little wave, as when I say your name. Okay, sorry. First off,
Simon says.
Yeah. Simon says, Liz Marshall, raise your hand. Hi, Liz. Okay, so Liz Marshall is an award-winning Canadian filmmaker who since the 90s has written, directed, and produced a diverse range of socially conscious documentaries, including the 2013 critically acclaimed documentary, The Ghosts in Our Machine, and her current feature doc, Meat the Future, chronicling the birth of cell-based meat. So thanks very much for joining us, Liz. Next up, we have John Lewis. He is well known for his health and nutrition company, Badass Vegan, and is co-creator of the powerful 2020 doc, They're Trying to Kill Us, which connects the dots between diet, disease, poverty, systemic racism, and industry collusion. Keegan Kuhn, of course, is the other co-creator of They Are Trying to Kill Us, as well as the director of highly acclaimed documentary films, Cowspiracy, What the Health, and Running for Good. He is also the owner of First Spark Media. Then we have Demetrius Bagley. He is an award-winning producer of the 2011 documentary Vegucated. Love that one. And finally, Shawn Stratton is the founder and director of the International Vegan Film Festival and World Tours. So welcome, everybody. Like Denise said, we are surrounded by royalty here. So thanks very much for being here. I want to talk first to you, Shawn. We want to talk specifically about the medium of documentary films on sort of like a general scale. So what do you think it is about documentary films as a medium specifically, say over the last decade, that has really become such an impactful tool for educating and informing and inspiring and motivating the public on issues of animal rights and food production, environmental activism, human health? Why documentary films, do you think?
Yeah, I think, film in general has exploded over the last 10 years with, the rise of YouTube and filmmaking equipment, essentially has become a lot more accessible, I think. And I think films have just a way of touching people. They have a way of explaining things that really touch people in a different way than maybe a book. You know, there's not as many people are going to sit down and read the China study as are going to watch the Health. It's a bit easier to watch the Health than get through the China study or Educated or other films. And I think they're becoming better and better produced over the years. I think if you probably went back to like pre 2010, there's probably some films out there that are similar, but maybe not as good as quality, not getting the exposure. And then I think people are obviously becoming more aware of vegan issues, plant-based issues, and they're sharing more, and it's easier to share, view and share. And I think all those things are catching up. The quality is becoming better. I think, it's definitely prolific in the animal welfare avenue. That's in the festival. That's the one, the category we get the most in. And I think those films are becoming much more digestible for the general public. I think, years ago, not even that long ago, all the animal welfare films were all, blood and guts and gore. And now filmmakers are being extremely creative and getting the message of what happens in a slaughterhouse without maybe that blood, guts, and gore, and maybe a bit more of a digestible film for your friends and family to see it that maybe aren't hardcore vegans. So
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I'm wondering, Demetrius, your film was sort of on the cusp of exactly what Shawn was just talking about, this sort of change in not only quality, but also content of what we were seeing in sort of the vegan animal rights world, going from, like you said, the blood and guts to sort of these more educated, vegucated ways of talking about this topic. So what do you think it is about documentaries as a medium for this message?
Lots of thoughts there, right? Because it's been 10 years for me, actually, just this month since I signed on to Vegucated. And Vegucated is actually part of that teeter-totter that Shawn, you were just talking about, production values. Marisa, the filmmaker, the director, writer, and the unnamed producer, she wanted an activist tool. She had spent a vegan activist tool. She had spent quite a bit of time 2 decades ago in the knots, if I can call it that. And so she knew when people saw it that they would relate to it. But if they wouldn't watch it, right, because of the bloods, guts, and gore, because people kind of know that's going on, they kind of know. But if she could come from a different angle and use more persuasion versus being provocative, that people would start to think, ask questions, become curious, anything in there. And I think we've achieved that. Many more things to say, but let me pause there. I think the provocative was there, right? And not only in documentary, but in a lot of sort of pre-social media, really, if you start thinking about PETA and other players. She wanted to come from a persuasive and necessarily use humor, which we still haven't seen as much of as I'd like with the feature-length projects, whether documentary or fiction-based.
Great. John, I feel like you're kind of on the other side of that, coming into this so recently in terms of your latest project. Maybe do you want to talk about what it feels like to be creating a documentary film in this vein in 2020? What do you think it is about the documentary film medium today that makes it so impactful?
I believe, and I've always talked about this, is that documentaries meet people where they're at. A lot of times especially as vegans, we get to a certain space and we're like, hey, you all should come over here with us. But we don't go back to lend out a hand, and we don't remember that we weren't always vegans. Of course, there's some people that have been vegan since birth, but we forget sometimes that, we might have been that person with a steak sandwich just 2 weeks ago. You see a lot of, you get that. You get somebody that just opened up a vegan page, they're angry, they're pissed, they just, the veil's been taken down and they're all upset and they just want to go. And then they forget that they used to be that person. And sometimes you have to go back. And that's what I think documentaries do. It's like, you can go meet a person back at their house. You got the invite in. They don't have to go buy a book. Nobody sees them walk around with this book that says China study or anything. It's the privacy of their own home. And I think that's what documentaries do. They allow people to be themselves, check out this information. If they actually hated it, they never have to tell anybody it happened. With a book, if you're in a book club, there's no documentary club yet. I say yet because somebody might invent it. There's no documentary club yet where you have to admit, I watched it, but I didn't get what you got out of it. Book club is all these different things where you have these aspects of I got this from the book, I got this from the book. It's 20 people around and everybody's admitting that they read it. And once you read something, like, you know, like Maya Angelou said, once you know better, you do better. So it's kind of like that sense of there's no pressure on anybody to watch. After watching a documentary, you don't necessarily have to change your life. So I think that's why the impact is so important right now, is to make a film to where after they watch it, even if they don't change, the seed has been planted. And it may get watered down the line, and somebody else might, you know, they might watch, you know, Vegucated, and then they might watch What the Health, and then they might watch, you know, They're Trying to Kill Us. So basically they got these 3 steps. I think a lot of times as vegans, we want to be the one to plant the seed, water the seed, cultivate the seed. We want all the credit. It's like sometimes it's a team effort. And I think that's what documentaries are doing now. That's everything.
An incredible point. That's so true. It's so true. And people can do it in the privacy of their own home without a vegan screaming at them behind them or something like that.
I mean, we're screaming on the other side, but we're just like, we make it look better. It's just the other way.
They can pause it if they need to. I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, so I would love to talk a little bit more specifically about your projects. Keegan, I mean, arguably your work, I mean, for me personally, Cowspiracy and What the Health were 2 of the most profound films in my journey in becoming vegan. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about your projects made them specifically so impactful? How do you think you reached audiences as well as you did?
Well, thanks for that. I think that what my co-director Kip Anderson and I did with those films is we tried to make it as funny as possible, wherever possible. You know, obviously we're dealing with very heavy subject matters, but if you can, you know, as Demetrius said, like inject a little bit more humor into a project, it lightens the mood and makes it more digestible for an audience. And then, you know, we tried to go as high quality as we possibly could. You know, there's a lot of really incredible documentaries out there from well-intentioned activists, but who aren't necessarily filmmakers. And so the production quality isn't always the highest. And so we're already trying to get an audience to watch, you know, an unpopular subject matter. We might as well make it as, you know, beautiful as possible. And I think Liz Marshall has, you know, excelled at that. I mean, anyone who's seen Ghost will just be amazed at the quality of filmmaking. And so that's very much, you know, what we tried to do with Cowspiracy and What the Health. And then the success, I think, was also just the right time and place, is that, you know, Netflix picked it up. It's a time when people are digesting films in a, you know, mass way versus where you used to always have to have a major studio behind you. You had to have a successful theatrical run. And so I think it's just, you know, time and place. People are waking up and they want the information.
Yeah, that's very true, very true. And what you said about Liz is absolutely true. Liz, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on what made your projects so impactful, because they absolutely have been. What do you think is the secret to making a documentary film that really engages the public the way that people have with yours?
Yeah, hi everyone, and hey Keegan, thanks for that. I think there's many different, so from a methodology perspective, I think there's so many different ways we can tell stories, and always you have to come back to what is your motivation, what is your intention, who is my audience. So for Ghosts, I'm going to start with the personal. So when I was making that film, I had my own like extreme kind of dramatic epiphany. And I had been vegetarian, but I was not yet vegan. And so the whole vegan ethos is something that I discovered during my process. And I realized that it wasn't a step, it was a leap. And in that leap, I felt that my blinders had been removed. And I wanted to create a film that could have that experience for people, so that they wouldn't look away, they wouldn't turn away, but rather that they would engage with something that is so profoundly complex. And it was on the heels of Blackfish. So we had this, you know, Blackfish, of course, you know, the hashtag Blackfish effect had this enormous impact about a single issue, you know, about something that's a no-brainer for the vast majority to rally behind and get behind. And it did have that impact. It impacted, you know, SeaWorld at the shareholder level. So there was a direct call to action with that film that made it very sort of practical for viewers to get behind. Whereas with The Ghost in Our Machine, it's more complex. It's more about, hey, we care about our companion animals, we care about wildlife. Let's also care about these invisible industries and animals, the billions of animals that are hidden from our view. And this is a moral issue. And how can we reach people how can we reach beyond the core audience? Although the core audience is pivotal and incredibly important to any campaign, how can we reach beyond, though, and get into the living rooms of people around the globe who have a heart, who have a moral conscience, because I believe that most people do. And how can we appeal to them and touch their heart and open their mind? And so for me, it comes back to that question. And so for me as a filmmaker who has been making, human rights, environmental rights, and now animal rights films, because they're all equally important to me, it was all about, okay, let's humanize this. So for, the style of filmmaking that I embrace, it's character driven. So in other words, focus on an individual, on a human that can anchor the experience for a broad audience and allow that to be the entry point to hopefully, a very wide global audience can relate and feel empathy for that main subject, for that main character in your film, and then take people on a journey. So yeah, it's true, my films don't really have a sense of humor. There is more of that gravitas and kind of haunting, like The Ghost in Our Machine is very haunting. But at the same time, it's considered to be, like a gentle approach in removing people's blinders, but you have to stick with it. You have to watch the whole film. And by the end of the film, it has a dramatic effect. That's the feedback that we had. And we actually conducted a formal impact evaluation, and we wrote a formal impact report that was funded by the Dog Society back in 2015. And that was a really, really, really useful exercise, because it allowed us to actually gauge the metrics from a qualitative and quantitative perspective to see how the film was moving in the world and how it was actually affecting social consciousness and behavioral change. But I think Keegan's films have been able to be sort of like a tsunami in terms of impacting behavioral change. Whereas I think The Ghosts in Our Machine has taken a different approach to impact. I think it's more of a consciousness raising film.
Interesting. So I'm thinking about these sort of different approaches that it's true, they're very different films in a lot of different ways. And I'm wondering, Shawn, with your experience in taking in so many of these films and dealing with audiences and their reactions to them, if you're going to think about future filmmakers or up and coming filmmakers or creators of any kind, and I'm going to ask you about this too later, John, because you're such a creator of so many things, what would you tell aspiring filmmakers, Shawn, if they wanted to make a big impact with these topics of animal rights, environmental activism, human health, food production? What would be your sort of tips from your area of expertise to give up and coming filmmakers?
Yeah, when I think of the films that are kind of rated high by our judges each year, a lot of times it's there's an emotional connection there, and it's usually an emotional connection to a person related to animals. And so building that story, kind of like Liz mentioned, around that character, and in a couple of cases I'm thinking about, it's sanctuary owners that started off as dairy farmers, things like that. There's several films out there like that right now. They always seem to be rating high in with our judges. Obviously, yeah, the humor as well is good, and I think that creativity about building a story without showing necessarily the blood, guts, and gory, I think that's evolving. Joanne MacArthur, We Animals, and Kelly and their group are great at doing those stories, those short stories with yeah, with that kind of impact. And I think that's going to only emerge. I think as well, the kind of storylines are going to emerge in terms of topics. It's not necessarily, going to be health related or direct animal related. It's going to be maybe vegan families or a vegan office environment, or, taking it broadly, or having a vegan character in a mainstream movie. Things like that, I think, are probably where the future is going to go.
Interesting. And would you agree on a lot of those points, John? What would you tell somebody, a content creator of any kind in this topic, in this world, who wants to make an impact with audiences? What would you suggest that they do?
John, your mic's still muted.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
See, what would I do without Keegan? But I have 2 kids running around the house, so I'm just trying to be kind to everybody. That's why I'm muting it. But I would say, honestly, as far as content creators, is know the audience. I think a lot of times we have this notion that we have a great idea, and that because I had this idea, everybody's going to love it. It's like, no, you have to cater to the audience, not to your own wants. I think that's sometimes, we see that a lot, where people, like, just on social media, if we're talking about content, people will say, well, I made this post and only 2 people liked it. It was like, yeah, because you made it for yourself. You didn't make it for anybody else. Same thing translates over to film. It's like, you made this film that you thought was going to be so impactful, but you didn't think about the audience. And if you don't think about the audience, or the customer, or whatever the person that's supposed to support you, if they have nothing to gain by watching it, or buying the product, or buying the service, you just made something for yourself. And I think that's what people have to keep in mind as they go into this. You may have an awesome idea to you, but who else is it for? And that's what, like, with our movie, it's for the people. I think everybody in here, all of our films have been for the people. It might have been our dream. It might have been our baby, as you could say, but our baby, we handed it off to everyone else. We're like, we trust you, here you go. And it's for them. And I think as long as people keep that in mind, then they'll be successful.
Demetrius, would you agree with that? Do you, bring it back to film specifically as a filmmaker, do you think considering the audience is really the most important part, or do you have other tips for up and coming filmmakers?
I don't know that is the most important part. I hear what you said, John, and I mostly agree. I think what's important, let me use Vegucated specifically, and then I want to back up a little bit, not just film. Are you talking to me, or are you talking to yourself? Right? Basically the same thing you said. Marisa necessarily set out with Vegucated to get people thinking and to have a conversation and to instigate dialogue. A lot of people think she/we were out to move the needle and make a lot of people vegan. That would be great, but she was very studied, and still is very studied, about that's not going to happen. If that was going to happen, we would have seen films about civil rights in the 80s and the 90s, and we would be in a very different world than we're sitting in 2020. Same for vegetarianism, which was hotter right in those days, and then veganism would have been, we would have had this conversation maybe 10, 15 years ago. I think I think when you're a communicator, or I'm not sure if I want to say creator, but a communicator, social media, filmmaking, music maker, certainly journalists, bloggers, the list goes on, and a photojournalist, list goes on and on. If you're putting it out there for an audience, then I think you have to stay in conversation, right? Or some sort of dynamic or relationship, right? Might be the best word there. That's the nuance I think I would add on to what you said, John. I think some people, though, are meant to create for themselves. Film is very expensive. It's a team, not even sport. It requires a team, back to the labor and the cost. And so some have been able to do that. I don't know about in the vegan world, but if we look at a lot of indie film, documentaries, or fiction narrative, 5, 10, 15, 20, and certainly going back forth, I think some of the pieces that audiences or viewers grapple with is they fall right in that lane you're saying, John. Oh, you were just talking to yourself, and so I don't totally know what you're saying, and or, agree or like it or relate, and the list goes on. But when we're in conversation, whatever scale the film is, and whatever the intent is, like a part of what Liz said, then all sorts of things can happen. I think we can all speak to that. I think Shawn has that amazing role where you've seen that, I'm guessing, over dozens and maybe soon hundreds of films or of whatever length, and could probably go through very quickly and said, this person didn't ever iron out, or this team, who their audience was and or what they wanted to say or have people take away. Or writers have the same difficulties, but I think the ones that I've been able to chat with, particularly fiction, if they get into mainstream publisher, again, of whatever size, or even self-publish, it's that they need this story, this message, this character, those pieces to get out to the world. And so they start negotiating with, how do I keep, this is still my child, but how do I put this child out into the world so it can engage with the world? But that's not always a requirement. But film is very expensive, emotionally, energetically, cash, labor, the list goes on. So it's not something I think we'll see with vegan films for a while, until we feel we've even more arrived at getting these different messages, for lack of a better word, out, right? We're on different missions, right? To change people's minds, plates, ideas, or just pop the bubble. No, we just don't eat tofu and grass or twigs and berries or whatever. So I think that intent is already there. And we know, if not consciously, at least mid-conscious, we have to speak to an audience, whether it's 5 people, 5 million, or 5 billion.
So I'm wondering, Keegan, on that note, if you were thinking of explaining this to, say, a high school student who's vegan and who has seen your films, have seen all of your films, and says, I want to do that, what would you say would be the first steps to making those connections and bringing those messages together to someone who's really starting out?
For anybody starting out, I mean, I think everybody would agree with this, is that having the passion, like if you're going to make a film, you've got to believe in it, and part of it should be for you, as John and Demetrius both said, like, this is something you feel you can put your life into. But the biggest thing that I see, like, lots of young filmmakers and new filmmakers of any age, they want to jump into doing features. And that's like saying, I've never built a shed, but I'm going to build a house. And it's like, well, build a shed first, do a short film, shoot a whole bunch of little mini docs. You can tell a story in 5 minutes, then try and tell a story in 15 minutes and 50 minutes, and then, 90 minutes, whatever your length's going to be. But to start with what you've got and start small, because you will save yourself a ton of time and a ton of money and a ton of pain when you're trying to fix a problem on a 5-minute film versus a 55-minute film.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. And something probably far less overwhelming for a new filmmaker to take on. That's a really good point. Finally, Liz, I want to know from your perspective, if you were to speak to female filmmakers, it's no coincidence that we only have one female panelist. I'm sure that the numbers are underrepresented for females in filmmaking. And I would love to hear what you would want to tell young or new female filmmakers specifically about how to get into this art form and this business.
Absolutely. That's a very topical, very important subject, as important as, filmmakers of color, BIPOC, having more agency, more funding. Essentially, it's about representation. It's about who's telling whose story, and it's about opportunity and, the purse strings, right? And changing that paradigm. And it is changing. We are going through a cinema revolution, and documentary is like there's a renaissance here when it comes to, films that are authored by women, films that are authored by, creators that are of color. And so this is extremely important. Otherwise, we're just ingesting the same old narrative from the same old gaze over and over again. So, I'm going to apply the same thing to the vegan lens. because, or from an activist lens, whether you're coming at it as an environmentalist or as an animal rights for, vegan from an ethical perspective. It's about how we tell those stories and who's telling those stories. And so I do mentor young filmmakers. I absolutely love doing that. It's a passion of mine. And actually there's an interview with Women in Hollywood that was recently published with me about Meet the Future. And they always ask that same question. And so in a nutshell, like I would just say to young female filmmakers, roll up your sleeves. If you want to be a director, don't be afraid to touch gear, use gear, film, edit, do everything, because to be a good director means you also understand how to frame, how to shoot, how to edit, how to shape and construct your story. So try everything. Don't feel limited, ever. Don't ever feel limited, and be fearless. And eventually you're going to get to a place where you trust your own instincts, and you'll stop sort of listening to the cacophony of voices outside of you, and you'll learn to listen to your own voice and follow that as your guide, as a creator. And I think, that's certainly been my journey and continues to be my journey.
Excellent.
Jessica, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's actually, you said, obviously in our panel here that there's only one female, but last year in the festival, over 65% of our filmmakers were female.
Wow. Oh, that's excellent to hear.
Yeah, and it's probably about the same this year. It was actually close to 70% last year, closer to 70. And then on Keegan's point, probably 70% of the films are short films, like under 30 minutes. That come into the festival, and we love those, and they're the ones that are easier to show. Our world tour is kind of made up of our best of our shorts, because we can't show 6 features in a row on a world tour screening in 2 hours. So yeah, there's definitely lots of power in short films, and there's a lot of great female filmmakers out there. And to go on Liz's point, look out, seek them out as mentors. I'm sure, like Liz says, she does mentor them. They're so receptive, the ones that I know and that I've worked with the festival. So
is this a change you've seen over your time doing this in the last few years? This uptick of female makers?
Yeah, this is just our 3rd year of the festival right now. So it's pretty the norm. Like the first 3 years, like last year, there was definitely more female. And this year our submissions just closed a month ago, so I haven't got all the stats yet, but I'm guessing it's pretty close to the same. So
it's excellent. That's great to hear. Awesome to hear.
I want to add on, if I can, to a couple things. One, I'm the producer, one of the producers of Educated. The filmmaker proper, air quotes there, is Marisa. It was her idea, and there's a whole conversation to be had there. But one of the most important, and I'm trying to edit myself not to go on and on about it. One of the most important things, I came on later to the film. I wasn't involved with the production or the pre-production. I was involved somewhat with post-production, and really, I'm the midwife is the joke, but actually the reality of how I relate to Educated. I'm the midwife and the other stepdad, or the stepdad. And how does this, how do we birth this movie brand baby, and go out in the world? One of the key things, though, I more want to say is, for any vegan activist, whether you're making shorts or features or neither, you can ask for help. Vegans are often, like, I'll probably cry here, amazingly generous within their means of time and budget. They want to be asked. I want to be asked. I know Keegan has had this experience at least a little bit that I'm for sure of, but about, Keegan is one of the best crowdfunders that I know of, vegan or not. That's really important when we talk about, going back to part of what Liz said about money. You need money at various points to make a film, vegan or not. You just, particularly a feature, you just do. It's part of the process. And it's part of why Marisa asked for help. Marketing is a lot of my background. And that just snowballed into a key conversation of, will you help me get birth this movie baby? The other thing I want to say, That's super important. And Liz said it in a few ways. I want to articulate it like this because it was how I came onto Vegucated. We have to support female filmmakers, full stop. Particularly if we want to change the narratives that we're seeing. For sure, we can talk about queer filmmakers, or we can talk about BIPOC. Those are for sure important, no question. But getting more women to tell stories, right, in whatever formats, that's huge for the world, you know, I don't even know how many times over. And that was a key draw for me to work on Vegucated. I knew I was supposed to produce. I'm not a director. I'm not going to play one on TV. I love the way behind the scenes such, and I wanted to work with at least a team of women, if not just a woman, and then things, you know, Providence or whatever happened. But I want to say again, please go out of your way to support female filmmakers. That's crucial for film to change, veganism to change, and really for the world to change. And we're overdue to give the ladies the gear and all of the things. And riffing off of what Keegan said, filmmaking is much more complex than I think most people know, even those of us who have studied it. And you need help. You need to put on different hats and caps and bandanas, and literally and figuratively. So it's not I'll stop there and say, ask for help is key, and it should be uncomfortable, right? You're putting yourself out there, but it's part of the process. And please, please, please support all sorts of filmmakers, especially female filmmakers.
That's a really good point. And I think because in the vegan and animal activism, environmental activism world, I think we see the numbers are higher for female participants in general. And so to have, you know, more of these people who are involved in different aspects of veganism and activism take on film as a tool of activism, really, in my opinion, it's a tool of activism. We have such an abundance of people with stories to tell. So that's a really, really great point. I'm glad we got to that point. I feel like we should give a shout out to Fern Levitt, filmmaker of Sled Dogs. She did a really good job, and she's one of the most strong promoters of film I've ever met. She does not quit, and I think we should give her a shout out in this moment. So moving on finally to the last question. This is just a quick one. We'll go around to each one of you. I'd like to know, you can take a minute to think about it, maybe a second to think about it. What is one documentary film each of you would suggest that others watch, not just because they're great, but because they did a really good job at making an impact on audiences, either and for the animals, for the environment, for people, human health? What would be one that you would suggest others to watch specifically because of the impact that they're able to make? Maybe I'll start with you because you're probably the expert. Shawn, go right ahead.
You know, it's not an easy answer. That's why we ask the right questions, right? I think it's the person who's asking me for a suggestion. Am I going to suggest something to my buddies that I, you know, play hockey with or do ultramarathons with, or is it my mother? You know, my mother's not that interested in game changers, but Forks Over Knife or What the Health, she might be a lot more interested in. And so, yeah, so it's hard. I'm kind of dodging the question in terms of not giving you one, but you know, for me, Forks Over Knives was really big at the time because it was, you know, I was into my health and still am, and that's what did the switch for me. For my wife at the time, it was Vegucated that switched for her, and we're like sitting next to each other and watched those within a month of each other, and like two completely different reactions. So I would throw my answer out to it depends on the person and try to gear it towards the person. If you got an animal lover, you know, there's ones obviously focused on that, Dominion and others, but yeah.
Okay, all right, that's a good point. So I'm going to reshape the question. I'm going to make it different for each of you. So now you've all had one in your head. It's going to change. Okay, so Keegan, what would be a documentary that you would suggest to another filmmaker, up-and-coming filmmaker, to watch specifically for their ability to impact audiences on these topics? And it could be one of yours.
I mean, obviously all fellow panelists, I mean, all of their films are masterpieces. But as far as a film to watch, to pick apart and to learn from, gosh, there's so many, and there's so many that do different things so well. I mean, so you could look at a film like The Cove from Louis Passoya, which Academy Award-winning film about the dolphin slaughter in Taiji, is so specific to that issue. So that's a phenomenal film as far as getting people motivated and behind a single issue. And then you can look at, a film like Earthlings, which, covers the entire scope of how human beings interact with non-human animals. And that film has had, incredible impact on people. So it's a really hard one. And then you could look at, films that, I mean, there's a documentary called The Imposter, and it's an incredible piece of art. It's not necessarily an engaging film for activism, but it's a really masterful piece of cinema.
Oh, did I lose you? Okay.
You're back.
Okay, I'm back. All right, I'm hopefully that last bit got recorded. Thanks for that. Okay, John, what about you? What's one that you think would be most impactful? Let's think for somebody that's a social media user, a younger person who you want to get thinking about these sorts of issues, these important issues. What would be a documentary that you would suggest that would be most impactful?
I think I'm glad that we kind of knocked it down to specifics, because like Shawn said, I think one of our biggest problems is we don't active listen. And like somebody might say, hey, I want to go vegan for health. And somebody's like, well, let me tell you about animal slaughter. And it's like, you just lost them right there. They were like, I don't want to go for health. And you're like, well, let me tell you about how the animals are treated. So I think sometimes we do have to cater to the audience again. Like, what are they looking for in that? For me, if that's the case, this might not even be it's not a vegan film at all, but I think in a sense of empowerment, which is something that I told Keegan, I really want to use that voice in our film as well. But as a sense of empowerment and understanding the power that each individual has, because you have to believe in yourself if you're going to take this journey, whether it's just to become vegan and then to take it even further to make a film. If you don't believe in yourself, it's going to be a rocky road. It's going to be a rocky road if you believe in yourself, because everybody's got that family member that gave them, a little trash talk when they first went vegan, like Demetrius said, they give you you shouldn't go vegan because I heard that this lady 100 years ago died of being vegan, or, there's all these different things you hear about. So I think, which I don't know if everybody else has seen this, but I think The Secret, which is a documentary that was a while ago, it's not necessarily about, veganism. Is not necessarily about, social rights, civil rights, animal agriculture, but it's about believing in yourself, because there's gonna be, as much as you're gonna find some great friends, some great camaraderie between people as veganism, it's gonna be sometimes you out on that island by yourself, and you got to believe in yourself and believe in your commitment to what you're doing. There's going to be that moment where you're going to be at your uncle's barbecue, and, some memories are going to flash back, and you're like, am I going to stay committed to what I'm here for? And so I think self-empowerment is big on that. And for me, watching The Secret years ago, while I know it probably didn't help a lot of people go vegan, it definitely helped me in my journey, because I was like, well, you know what? I believe in myself now. I can do what I'm supposed to do, no matter what anybody else thinks. And I think that helped with the journey.
I'm with you on that one, John. It did the same for me. I totally agree with you. Yeah, it was a big one in my world too. So good point. Liz, I want to talk to you a little bit about your sort of method of centralizing a human, following a character. I mean, the use of Joanne was so profound. What's another documentary that you can maybe suggest if there was a filmmaker an up-and-coming filmmaker who wanted to sort of learn more about that as a strategy to connect with audiences? Do you have one in mind?
I do. Laura Patois' Citizen 4 is one of my favorite films. I think it's really a masterful film. It's about, it breaks the Edward Snowden story to the world. And it's a remarkable example of character-driven storytelling, but also the relationship between the filmmaker and the participant. So I would really recommend that film. And then I had two other films in mind that are not necessarily singular in terms of character driven, but I just wanted to cite them to be part of this. Well, all the films on this panel, of course, are influential films, but when in 2005, the German film Our Daily Bread was released, I was really deeply moved and impacted by that film. And when I was doing my initial research, you know, before I was financed to make The Ghosts in Our Machine, I really was citing that film in terms of its tone, in terms of its cinematic approach. And actually I don't think there's any dialogue in that film. And The Ghosts in Our Machine actually is quite sparse in terms of dialogue. It's an image-rich documentary. So cinematography and Joanne's photographs, that landscape and sound is really a huge part of the journey, the emotional journey and the consciousness-raising experience for the viewer. But Our Daily Bread, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's about it's a meditation on our modern food system, and the sequences that include animals are very haunting. One other film I'd like to cite that is influential for me is Black Power Mixtape. And that's about the civil rights movement, and it uses just archive material from a journalist who had found this footage in a box, it had never been, purposed. It had never really been used, and it's a remarkable film. It's quite a feat. Watch that film, it's amazing.
Thank you for that list. That's a great list, Liz. Thank you very much. Demetrius, I feel like you probably are going to have a few ready to go at this point, so I'm not going to give you any specific lead here. You go right ahead. Tell us what you think.
I do have, I was like, wow, that's quite a question. Three things, two films. The first film I want to say in vegan world is please check out Liz's film. It's so different than a lot of what I've seen, although I have not been privy to as many titles as Shawn. And it's very different. I like a lot of non-USA film because silence is used more, and I love to talk, as you can probably tell, in dialogue. But sometimes we need to be able to ingest or digest and absorb. And your film just blew me away the way it kept doing that with gorgeous cinematography, which across all films we don't have enough, in my finding, enough gorgeous just visuals. Sometimes they want to talk it to death, maybe included. So that's within I haven't seen as many as Shawn by any stretch, but Liz's is so different and uses it. A lot of people sometimes look at it as, oh, it's so simple, and it's like, there's a lot of intent here, there's a lot of there's a lot of thinking, but it's not clubbed over your head, maybe bad pun there. It really is offered up, and for me, I thought it was very meditative, and then adds up in a way that I really like in a quieter film. Again, I don't think there's too much else that I've seen, and I would guess that exists in the vegan media, docs or not. The one that came to mind when you first asked the question is Mr. Soul, which is a relatively new title. It's about a Black media maker, and it's just really impactful. I don't want to try to summarize it. There's a lot going on, but it's basically a documentary meets biography of this really unknown or not known enough guy who helped spearhead a lot of Black public television, late 60s, early 70s. And that's not even beginning to do the film justice. There's so much going on. I sobbed watching it because I was like, holy shit, this dude, just in a few years with a lot of people, right? He was making media and a network even. He helped, just to lean a little bit into it, he helped break major name acts, or major now. So everyone came through there. This was in New York City proper. Aretha and Stevie and Bill Withers, and the list goes on and on and on. And a lot of names, you may not know. if you're not a New Yorker but it was groundbreaking and it was very political. This was part of the PBS universe, which wasn't even called PBS at that point. The other thing I want to say, riffing off what Keegan said with shorts, is there's a lot of people actually making documentary shorts, maybe not for submission to your festival, Shawn, but online. You see them all the time from news outlets now on Instagram, on Facebook, maybe on with the sort of highlighted, I'm forgetting the artist's name, the captions, and they're just clips, right? And then it says source, it's this graph, or it's this image from this protest or whatever. That's documentary, and that will get you into working with sound and working with images and telling the story. And do you want this to be 3 minutes or 30 seconds or 30 minutes? And how much will your audience stomach? And there and many other things, right? What colors are you going to use? What fonts? And all of that to put together even that 3 minute sort of short, or 2 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever. That is all part of just getting not even just your feet, your whole person wet, or people in it. And that can be done for little of no money on many people's laptops and desktops, and probably even phones at this point. I'm not even sure. That's a great place to start and see what you have the appetite for, what you gravitate to, and what you don't. And what you don't, find and ask, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, emails, text, whatever. Who's great at, style? Like, I want someone to have a great outfit like Jessica has on this Zoom. Who's great with makeup and has time and would like to help with a 7 minute short? I want to do a piece on John's business, right? There are always topics out there, and most of them people are interested in, believe it or not. But you have to keep them in mind of how you're telling the story, the intent, as Liz said much earlier, how are you purposing it, right? Don't talk at people, speak with them. I mean, film is just a communication vehicle or art, but it needs to be a two-way street, to kind of just stay with that cliche.
That's a great point to bring up too, about the fact that it can be quite short and still impactful. I mean, if we're thinking even to tools available to everyday people now, different social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, that have this ability to create short films essentially that can be really impactful. You think about the films that the Dodo makes and shares on social media. I mean, they're very powerful. People share them like crazy. They reach a lot of people. So that's a very good point. The filmmaking doesn't necessarily have to mean 30 minutes or feature length. That's a really great point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that draws us to a conclusion with this panel. Unless anyone has something that they really love to add, this is your chance if you have something to add. Yep.
I'm going to add to your question to Shawn towards the top. The thing that I haven't seen, and maybe have to go through the website, Shawn, feel free to nudge back. We haven't seen many biographies. I mean, we have the first name that comes to mind who's been around in vegan-dom, as I call it, DOM, is Miyoko, right? And I'm sure she's been approached, and I think she's had that conversation already with the co-filmmakers, if I'm not mistaken, and some others. But we need biographies of some of these folks, Gene Bauer, the list goes on. And again, even John has been out here and has already seen the needle move and is moving the needle in a very particular way. So I think I would add to the list, I definitely want to see some vegan families, and what does even family mean these days? Some vegan biographies or vegan autobiographies.
Mm-hmm.
You know what would be really wonderful is I'm just thinking, because I also work with Joanne MacArthur, We Animals. She has the Unbound Project, where we write these really great profiles of women on the front lines of animal advocacy. And I've written a few. Liz D is one that comes to mind. So I feel like you're right. That's a story that's a movie I would want to see. So that's a really good point. I'd love to see more of that as well.
We can't have Miyoko. We can't have Miyoko. She's one of our judges, so she would not be able to judge her own film. If we'd have to replace her.
What did you say, Keegan?
If you do want to see a biofilm about one of the greatest unsung heroes of the animal rights movement, it's Fiona Oakes, and I did a film about her called Running for Good, and she is one of those activists who doesn't get the attention that she deserves. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this film was right to your point, Demetrius, is that I feel like there is space, and there needs to be more biographical films about the heroes and leaders of this movement, and then particularly highlighting a woman
Great point.
Absolutely.
I think I'm so glad that we added that point on the end, and I think that's where we're going to draw it to a close. So thank you so much for everybody's wonderful input and insights. I hope this inspires people to go watch, and people to go make, and people to go think, and people to go share. So thank you all for being part of that. And again, everyone, please support the TVA that allowed us to all come together and have this conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.